Admiral Zexful stared at the holographic display showing the small blue planet called Earth. The data scrolled past his 4 eyes in neat columns of information. Population, 7 billion. Technology level, primitive. Weapons, crude projectile. Systems and chemical explosives. Space travel, limited to their own star system. This should have been simple. The Galactic Empire had done this dance thousands of times across the galaxy. Find a species that might become a threat. Send in the Vorthak Shadow Collective. Wait for the inevitable reports of success. Move on to the next target. The Vorthak were the Empire's secret weapon. For 3,000 years, they had eliminated 43 different species without a single failure. They were ghosts in the darkness, killers who could walk through walls and disappear into shadows. Most civilizations never even knew they existed until it was too late. Kethmer, the Silencer, floated in his meditation chamber aboard the stealth ship Void's Edge. His gray skin rippled with anticipation as he reviewed the mission parameters. Eliminate key leaders, disrupt communications, create chaos. Standard protocol for a primitive world. He had done this so many times that he could perform the tasks while sleeping. The species always reacted the same way. Leaders died, panic spread, and within days the entire civilization collapsed. Clean, efficient final on Earth. Commander Jake Sullivan sat in his office at the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, staring at readings that made no sense. For 3 months, his deep space monitoring equipment had been picking up strange signals. Gravitational distortions that appeared and disappeared. Energy signatures that didn't match any known technology. Jake had spent 20 years in the air. Force. He knew the difference between equipment malfunction and real data. These readings were real. Something was out there, and it was watching Earth. "Sir, we've got another one," said Lieutenant Carol Green, rushing into his office with a tablet. "Same energy signature as before, but this time it's closer, much closer." Jake looked at the data. The unknown craft was just outside the orbit of Jupiter. Whatever it was big, and it was using technology that human science couldn't explain. "Get me General Morrison on the line," Jake said, "and contact the other monitoring stations. If something's coming, we need to know about it." 3 days later, the first Vorthak pods landed on Earth. They came down in remote locations, away from cities and military bases. The pods were small, no bigger than a car, and they buried themselves deep in the ground after landing. Within hours, the occupants had emerged and begun their deadly work. Dr. Lisa Carter was having coffee in her lab at the University of Colorado when the first reports came in. Strange animal deaths in the Rocky Mountains. Hikers disappearing without a trace, equipment failures at nearby military installations. She was a xenobiologist, someone who studied the possibility of alien life. These reports matched theoretical patterns she had studied for years. The Vorthak moved through human society like smoke. They studied their targets, learned their habits, and struck when their victims were most vulnerable. Senator Robert King died in what appeared to be a heart attack. General William Hayes was found dead in his locked office, apparently from a stroke. Defense Secretary Patricia Moore vanished during a morning jog and was never found. But something was wrong. The humans weren't reacting the way they should. Instead of panic and collapse, they were getting angry. Instead of running away, they were asking questions. Instead of surrendering, they were fighting back. Captain Rick Barnes had been having a bad week even before the aliens arrived. His unit had been conducting training exercises in the Colorado wilderness when they started finding bodies. Not human bodies, but something else. Something that looked like it had been designed for killing. The first alien he saw was already dead, killed by what appeared to be a bear trap and a landslide. The creature was 7 feet tall, covered in gray scales, and equipped with technology. That made his military gear look like toys from a cereal box. But it was dead, and that meant it could be killed. "What the hell is this thing?" asked Sergeant Amy Rodriguez, poking at the alien's weapon with a stick. "I don't know," Rick replied, "but it's not from around here. And if there's one, there are probably more." The Vorthak had made their first mistake. They had assumed that Humans would behave like every other species they had encountered. They expected fear, confusion, and rapid social collapse. Instead, they found a species that became more dangerous when threatened. Jake Sullivan's monitoring station detected the first alien ship 3 hours before it was supposed to arrive. The craft was massive, easily the size of a city, and it was heading straight for Earth, but Jake had been busy. For the past week, he had been coordinating with military units around the world, sharing data about the strange disappearances and unexplained deaths the humans had figured out they were under attack. They just didn't know by whom or why. Dr. Carter had been analyzing the alien technology found with the dead creature in Colorado. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The equipment was designed for assassination. Stealth generators, energy, weapons, and communication devices that could reach across star systems. This wasn't first contact. This was an invasion, but the invasion wasn't going according to plan. The Vorthak had killed dozens of important humans, but instead of chaos, they found coordination. Instead of fear, they found fury. The humans were doing something that no species had ever done before. They were adapting military units that should have been leaderless after their commanders were eliminated, instead promoted new leaders and kept fighting. Scientists whose research facilities were destroyed simply moved their work to new locations. Politicians who should have been cowering in bunkers were instead appearing on television, telling their people to stay strong and fight back. Kethmer the Silencer received his first mission report with growing concern. 17 targets eliminated. But the human response was unlike anything in the databases. Instead of societal collapse, the humans were organizing. Instead of surrender, they were preparing for war. The Empire's plan was simple: eliminate the leadership, create chaos, and then arrive with the main fleet to finish off the survivors. But the humans had no single point of failure. When one leader fell, 10 more took their place. When one facility was destroyed, the work continued elsewhere. Admiral Zexthel read the reports from the Vorthak with growing alarm. The species that should have been eliminated within days was instead becoming more organized and more dangerous. Somehow, the humans had figured out they were being hunted, and they were starting to hunt back. The first captured Vorthak assassin was taken alive by a group of park rangers in Yellowstone National Park. The alien had been attempting to eliminate a minor government official when it walked into what the humans later called the most expensive bear trap in history. A creature was caught, sedated, and transported to a secure facility before it could activate its self-destruct mechanism within hours. Human scientists were studying alien technology that was centuries ahead of their own. They couldn't understand how it worked, but they could see what it was designed to do. And they began to understand that they were fighting for their lives against an enemy that had never failed before. The Vorthak Shadow Collective had built their reputation on being invisible, untouchable, and unstoppable. But they had never faced a species like humanity. They had never encountered a civilization that could lose its head and keep fighting. They had never met a people who could turn anything into a weapon and anyone into a soldier. The stage was set for a conflict that would change the galaxy forever. The most feared assassins in known space were about to discover that they had chosen the wrong planet to attack, and the humans, who had never even dreamed of alien life, were about to show the universe what happened when you threatened their home. 3 weeks had passed since the first Vorthak assassins landed on Earth. Admiral Zexthel floated in his command chamber aboard the Imperial flagship, staring at reports that made no sense. The mission should have been over by now. The humans should have been extinct or begging for mercy. Instead, he was reading casualty reports from his own forces. 17 Vorthak operatives were confirmed dead. 8 more were missing and presumed captured. The remaining assassins were requesting immediate extraction, claiming the mission was impossible to complete. In 3,000 years of service, the Vorthak had never failed a mission. They had never even asked for help. Captain Rick Barnes crouched behind a pile of rubble in what used to be downtown Denver. His team of mixed military personnel and civilian volunteers had been tracking alien movement patterns for days. They called themselves the Hunter Squad, and they had developed tactics that would have seemed insane to any military academy. "Movement at 2 o'clock," whispered Amy Rodriguez, peering through night vision goggles. "Looks like one of the big ones." The alien assassin moved like liquid shadow, its cloaking device making it nearly invisible. But nearly invisible wasn't good enough anymore. The humans had learned to track them by the small distortions they created in the air, the way dust moved around their feet, and the faint electrical interference from their equipment. Rick signaled to his team. They had practiced this maneuver dozens of times. The alien was walking into a trap that used nothing more sophisticated than rope, pulleys, and a lot of concrete blocks. Sometimes the old ways were the best ways. The Vorthak assassin never saw it coming. One moment it was stalking what appeared to be a lone human. The next moment it was buried under 3 tons of debris, its cloaking device sparking and failing. Amy Rodriguez was on top of it before it could recover using zip ties and duct tape to secure its weapons. "Got another one," she radioed to base. "That makes number 18. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., the most important hunt was about to begin. The Vorthak had decided to eliminate the President of the United States, believing that removing the human leader would finally trigger the collapse they needed. They had studied the target for days, mapped out every security measure, and planned the perfect assassination. What they hadn't counted on was that the humans had been studying them too. Colonel Ben Torres stood in the Situation Room beneath the White House, watching multiple screens showing the approaches to the building. His team had spent 2 weeks analyzing every captured piece of alien technology, every recorded attack pattern, and every scrap of intelligence they could gather. "They're coming tonight," he said to the assembled security team. "We know their methods, we know their equipment, and we know exactly where they're going to strike." The president had been moved to a secure bunker 3 levels down, replaced by a volunteer agent wearing advanced body armor. The entire White House had been turned into the most elaborate trap in human history. Every room contained hidden cameras, motion sensors, and enough firepower to level a city block. The Vorthak team arrived at midnight, just as predicted. Kethmore the Silencer himself led the mission, confident that his centuries of experience would ensure success. He had eliminated the leaders of dozens of species. One primitive human would be no challenge at all. The assassins moved through the building like ghosts, their cloaking devices rendering them invisible to normal security systems. They disabled alarms, bypassed locks, and neutralized guards with their usual efficiency. Everything was going according to plan. They reached the president's bedroom at exactly 12:47 a.m. Kethmore activated his energy weapon and prepared to complete the mission that would break human resistance forever. He never got the chance. The bed exploded in a shower of foam and metal springs. The walls fell away to reveal Marine snipers with weapons trained on every possible exit. The floor gave way to drop the aliens into a pit lined with steel mesh that interfered with their cloaking devices. "Welcome to Earth," said Sergeant Amy Rodriguez, who had been hiding in the ceiling for 6 hours. "You're under arrest." The capture of Kethmore the Silencer sent shockwaves through the galactic criminal underworld. The being who had single-handedly eliminated the ruling council of 3 different star systems had been taken alive by humans, using construction equipment and fire-suppressant foam. Dr. Lisa Carter was the first scientist to interview the captured Vorthak leader. She found him in a specially constructed cell, sitting in what appeared to be meditation. His gray skin had turned pale, and his 4 eyes held an expression she had never seen before in any of the aliens: confusion. "You are not behaving correctly," Kethmore said in perfect English. "Your species should have collapsed by now. Your leaders are dead, your communications are disrupted, your military is in chaos. Why do you continue to resist?" Lisa smiled. "Because that's what humans do. We don't know how to quit." The alien stared at her for a long moment. "This is not possible. We have eliminated 43 species. All of them followed the same pattern. Removed the leadership and the civilization falls." "Well," Lisa said, "you've never met humans before." News of the failed assassination attempt spread around the world within hours. But more importantly, it spread beyond Earth. The Vorthak had used quantum communication devices to stay in contact with their command structure. When those devices were captured, human intelligence agencies gained access to the entire Imperial communication network. Engineer Nicole Harper worked around the clock to decode the alien transmissions. What she discovered was both terrifying and encouraging. The Galactic Empire controlled hundreds of species across thousands of star systems. But their control was based entirely on fear of the Vorthak assassins. "They're not soldiers," Nicole explained to a joint session of world leaders. "They're not explorers or diplomats, they're bullies. Their entire civilization is built on the threat of assassination. Remove that threat, and they have nothing." The implications were staggering. If the Empire's power was based on fear, then defeating the Vorthak would undermine their entire structure. But first, the humans had to survive the immediate threat. Admiral Zexthel received the news of Kethmora's capture with something approaching panic. The most feared assassin in Imperial history was not only alive but was apparently talking to his captors. The humans had done something that should have been impossible. They had turned the hunter into the hunted. Emergency meetings were called across the Imperial fleet. For the first time in millennia, the Empire's military commanders were discussing the possibility of failure. The species that should have been eliminated within days was instead teaching the galaxy that the Vorthak could be defeated. Back on Earth, the captured aliens were providing intelligence that revolutionized human understanding of the galaxy. They spoke of dozens of species that had been eliminated by Imperial forces. They described worlds that had been conquered and civilizations that had been destroyed. But they also revealed something else. The Empire was not as strong as it appeared. Colonel Torres compiled the intelligence reports and presented them to the United Nations Security Council. "The Empire controls through fear," he explained. "They use the Vorthak to eliminate potential threats before they can become actual problems. But they've made a mistake with us. We're not just surviving their attack, we're learning from it." The humans had captured enough alien technology to begin reverse engineering it. They couldn't build faster-than-light ships yet, but they could understand the principles behind cloaking devices, energy weapons, and quantum communication systems. More importantly, they were learning to turn those technologies against their creators. Captain Barnes led the first human strike team to leave Earth's atmosphere. Using a captured Vorthak stealth ship, they targeted an alien supply depot hidden in the asteroid belt. The mission was simple: gather intelligence and send a message to the Empire that Earth was not helpless. The attack was a complete success. The human team destroyed the depot, captured additional prisoners, and most importantly, transmitted their victory back to the Imperial fleet. The message was clear: the humans were no longer just defending themselves. They were taking the fight to their enemies. As the fourth week of the conflict began, the situation had completely reversed. The Vorthak were afraid to operate on Earth. The Empire was receiving reports of human vessels appearing in neighboring star systems. And across the galaxy, enslaved species were beginning to whisper about the aliens who had made the impossible possible. The humans had done something that no species had ever accomplished. They had made the Vorthak Shadow Collective afraid. And once that fear began to spread, the entire structure of the Galactic Empire began to crack. Admiral Zexthel had not slept in 3 days. The command bridge of his flagship buzzed with nervous energy as reports continued to arrive from across the sector. The humans were no longer confined to their small blue planet. They had somehow acquired functional Imperial technology and were using it to strike at targets throughout the local star systems. The latest report made his blood run cold. A human strike team had attacked a Vorthak safe house on the mining world of Kepler 442b. The facility had been completely destroyed, its occupants either killed or captured. But that wasn't the worst part. The humans had broadcast the entire attack across Imperial communication networks, sending a clear message to every species in the Empire. The Vorthak could be defeated. Colonel Frank Morrison floated in the command. chair of the captured Vorthak stealth ship that his team had renamed the Ghost Hunter. The vessel had been modified with human technology, creating a hybrid that was more effective than either design alone. Human ingenuity combined with alien technology had produced something that neither side had expected. Target acquired, reported Lieutenant Dave Wilson from the weapons station. Vorthak training facility, just like the intelligence reports described? Frank studied the tactical display. The facility was built into an asteroid, hidden from normal sensors and protected by automated defense systems. It had been operating for over 2 centuries, training new generations of assassins to serve the Empire. Today, it would become another symbol of Imperial weakness. All teams, this is Ghost Leader, Frank transmitted on the open Imperial frequency. We are about to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten Earth. Begin the attack. The assault was swift and brutal. Human Marines, wearing modified alien armor and carrying hybrid weapons, cut through the facility's defenses like a hot knife through butter. The Vorthak defenders, trained for stealth and assassination, were completely unprepared for a direct military assault, but the humans weren't just there to destroy. They were there to rescue. Deep in the facility's detention levels, they found something that changed everything. 17 beings from different species, all scheduled for execution. These weren't criminals or enemies of the Empire. They were scientists, teachers, and leaders whose only crime was asking questions about Imperial rule. Dr. Alex Kennedy had been studying Imperial political structure through interrogations of captured prisoners. What he discovered painted a disturbing picture of galactic civilization. The Empire wasn't a government in any traditional sense. It was a protection racket on a cosmic scale. They don't rule through law or tradition, Alex explained to the Earth Council. They rule through fear. Every species in the Empire lives in terror of the Vorthak. They pay tribute, provide resources, and obey orders because they believe the alternative is extinction. The rescued prisoners confirmed Alex's analysis. They spoke of worlds where entire populations lived in constant fear. They described civilizations that had given up scientific advancement, artistic expression, and even basic freedom just to avoid attracting imperial attention, but they also spoke of hope. News of humanity's resistance was spreading through underground networks across the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, enslaved species were beginning to believe that rebellion was possible. Major Kate Hughes led the most daring mission, yet attempted by human forces. Intelligence gathered from captured Vorthak operatives had revealed the location of a secret Imperial research facility on the edge of the galaxy. The facility contained detailed files on every species the Empire had eliminated, along with plans for future conquests. The mission required Kate's team to travel further from Earth than any human had ever gone. They flew through space that had been controlled by the Empire for thousands of years, using captured alien technology to avoid detection. The journey took 2 weeks, but when they arrived, they found something that made the risk worthwhile. The research facility was massive, containing the accumulated knowledge of 43 extinct civilizations. But more importantly, it contained the Empire's plans for the future. The humans learned that Earth was just one of hundreds of worlds scheduled for elimination. The Empire had identified every species in the galaxy that might someday pose a threat and had made plans to destroy them all. We're not just fighting for Earth, Kate radioed back to command. We're fighting for every species that's ever going to exist. The Empire wants to eliminate anyone who might challenge them ever. The data they transmitted back to Earth was staggering. Star maps showing the locations of enslaved worlds. Military assessments of Imperial forces. Most importantly, communication codes that would allow contact with resistance movements across the galaxy within days. Human agents were making contact with rebel groups that had been hiding in the shadows for centuries. The message was simple: the Vorthak can be defeated, and we can teach you how. The Empire's High Council convened an emergency session as reports of uprisings began arriving from across Imperial space. The Andromedan resistance had sabotaged 3 Imperial supply convoys. The survivors of the vegan massacre had destroyed a garrison on their homeworld. Dozens of other species were openly defying imperial rule for the first time in living memory. "This is impossible," declared Council Leader Thexville, his tentacles writhing with agitation. "The subject species do not have the capability for coordinated resistance. They lack the technology, the training, and the leadership." "They have something else," replied Intelligence Director Quinder, reviewing the latest reports. "They have human advisors. The primitives from the Sol system are teaching our subjects how to fight." The truth was even worse than the Council feared. The humans weren't just inspiring rebellion. They were actively supporting it. Human advisors were appearing on worlds throughout the Empire, bringing with them captured Imperial technology and tactical knowledge that turned peaceful populations into effective resistance fighters. Back on Earth, the captured Vorthak leader Kethmar sat in his cell, watching news broadcasts of the spreading rebellion. For the first time in his long life, he was beginning to understand what his actions had cost the galaxy. The species he had helped eliminate hadn't been threats to galactic peace. They had been sources of art, science, and culture that could never be replaced. "You created this," Dr. Lisa Carter said during one of their regular interviews. "Your empire built its power on fear and death. What did you think would happen when that fear was removed?" Kethmar's response surprised her. "I thought we were bringing order to chaos. I believe the Empire's propaganda about dangerous species and necessary elimination. I never questioned whether our actions were right or wrong. And now?" The alien assassin looked at her with what might have been regret. "Now I see that we were the chaos, we were the danger, and perhaps it is time for that to change." The transformation of the galaxy's most feared assassin was symbolic of a larger change taking place throughout Imperial space. Species that had lived in fear for millennia were beginning to remember what freedom felt like. The Empire's carefully maintained balance of terror was collapsing, and at the center of it all were the humans. Admiral Zextel received the final report that confirmed his worst fears. The rebellion had spread to over 300 star systems. Imperial forces were being overwhelmed by coordinated attacks that used tactics clearly developed by human military advisors. The Empire's supply lines were cut, their communication networks were compromised, and their most feared weapon was in enemy hands. But the most terrifying part of the report was the footnote at the bottom. Human vessels had been detected in the outer reaches of the Imperial core systems. The species that should have been eliminated within days was now threatening the heart of the Empire itself. The Galactic Empire had spent thousands of years believing that power came from the ability to destroy. They had built their civilization on the graves of dozens of species, convinced that fear was the ultimate weapon. But the humans had taught them something that would change the galaxy forever. Courage was more powerful than fear, and hope was stronger than despair. As the rebellion spread and the Empire crumbled, one thing became clear: the galaxy would never be the same. The age of the Vorthak was ending, and the age of freedom was about to begin. The message arrived on a frequency that had never been used for anything except Imperial commands. Admiral Zextel stared at the communication terminal, unable to believe what he was seeing. For the first time in the recorded history of the Galactic Empire, they were asking for peace talks. Ambassador Patricia Wells read the transmission 3 times before she was convinced it was real. The Empire wanted to negotiate, not surrender terms or tribute payments, but actual peace talks. The beings who had ruled the galaxy through fear and violence for thousands of years were asking humanity to help them find a way to end the war. "They're scared," said General Linda Parker, studying the tactical reports from across Imperial space. "Their entire system is falling apart. The rebels are winning on every front, and their own forces are starting to question orders." Patricia nodded. The human fleet had grown from captured ships and hybrid technology into a force that could challenge Imperial vessels on equal terms. More importantly, they had become the symbol of hope for oppressed species throughout the galaxy. The peace offer had come through Admiral Zextel himself, transmitted directly to Earth's leadership. The message was simple and desperate. The Empire was willing to discuss terms for ending the conflict. They would meet wherever humanity chose, under whatever conditions humanity demanded. "It's a trap," warned Colonel Ben Torres during the emergency session of the Earth Council. "They've never negotiated with anyone before. Why would they start now?" Dr. Alex Kennedy disagreed. "Because they don't have a choice. Our intelligence reports show that over half their territory is in open rebellion. Their military is spread too thin to maintain control. They need peace more than we do." The debate continued for hours, but eventually the decision was made. Humanity would agree to peace talks, but on their terms. The meeting would take place on a neutral space station built specifically for the purpose, with security provided by human forces. For the first time in galactic history, the Empire would come to the negotiating table as the weaker party, the construction of peace. Station Alpha took 3 months and involved cooperation between humans and dozens of rebel species. The station was built using a combination of human engineering and alien technology, creating a structure that represented the new galaxy they were all trying to create. Dr. Steve Morgan had spent those 3 months working with the captured Vorthok prisoners, helping them come to terms with what they had done and what they could become. The transformation had been remarkable. Several of the former assassins had volunteered to serve as mediators in the peace talks, using their knowledge of Imperial structure to help design a better system. The most surprising volunteer was Kethmer himself. The former leader of the Vorthok had undergone a complete change of perspective during his months of captivity. He spoke now of justice instead of order, of cooperation instead of conquest. "I have killed representatives of dozens of species," he told the human delegation. Before the talks began, "I cannot undo what I have done, but perhaps I can help prevent it from happening again." The Imperial delegation arrived at Peace Station Alpha in ships that looked tired and worn. Admiral Zexthal led a group of officials who seemed smaller and less impressive than their fearsome reputation had suggested. They were followed by representatives from rebel species across the galaxy, beings who had never before been allowed to speak in Imperial councils. Patricia Wells had been chosen to lead the human negotiating team. She sat across the table from Admiral Zexthal, flanked by military advisors and former Vorthok prisoners who served as consultants. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The galaxy's former victims were now in charge of its future. "The Empire proposes a return to the previous system," Admiral Zexthal began, his voice lacking its former authority. "We will withdraw our forces from human space and guarantee your independence in exchange for an end to support for rebel activities." Patricia shook her head. "That's not how this works. You don't get to go back to terrorizing the galaxy just because you leave us alone. The killing stops here, and it stops everywhere." The negotiations were tense and difficult. The Empire wanted to maintain some form of control over their former subjects. The rebels wanted complete independence and reparations for centuries of oppression. The humans wanted something that had never existed before, a galaxy where different species could coexist as equals. The breakthrough came when Kethmer addressed the Imperial delegation directly. "I served the Empire for over 2 centuries, he said, his voice carrying the weight of his crimes. "I believed we were bringing order to chaos, but I have learned that we were the chaos. We were the ones who brought death and fear to peaceful worlds." The former assassins' words had a profound effect on the Imperial representatives. Here was their greatest weapon, their most feared agent, telling them that everything they had believed was wrong. Dr. Kennedy presented the human proposal for a new galactic order. The Empire would be dissolved and replaced by a confederation of equal species. Each world would govern itself according to its own traditions and values. Disputes would be resolved through negotiation and arbitration, not assassination and conquest. "Who would enforce such a system?" asked Admiral Zexthal. "Who would maintain order without the threat of consequences?" "We would," replied General Parker. "Humanity would serve as peacekeepers and mediators, not as rulers but as protectors of the peace." The idea was revolutionary. Instead of order through fear, the galaxy would have order through justice. Instead of conquest and submission, there would be cooperation and mutual respect. It was everything. The Empire had never been. The former imperial species reacted to the proposal with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Many had lived their entire lives under imperial rule and couldn't imagine any other way of existence. But others, particularly the younger generation, embraced the idea of a free galaxy with enthusiasm. The Vorthak posed a special problem. They were trained killers with no other skills, members of a culture built entirely around assassination and stealth. What would happen to them in a peaceful galaxy? The solution came from an unexpected source. Kethmer proposed that the Vorthak be reformed into a peacekeeping force, their skills redirected toward protection rather than murder. They would serve as guardians of the new order, using their abilities to prevent the kind of violence they had once perpetrated. "We know how killers think because we were killers," he explained. "We can stop assassination attempts because we know how they are planned. We can prevent wars because we understand how they begin." The negotiations continued for weeks, with representatives from hundreds of species working to design a government that had never existed before. There were arguments, walkouts, and moments when it seemed like the talks would collapse entirely. But gradually a framework emerged. The Soul Accords, named after humanity's home system, established the foundation for galactic peace. The Empire was officially dissolved, its territories divided among their original inhabitants. A confederation government was established with representatives from every species, with humanity serving as mediators and peacekeepers. Most importantly, the accords included provisions for justice and reconciliation. War crimes trials would be held for those responsible for genocide and oppression. Reparations would be paid to survivors of imperial violence, and education programs would be established to ensure that future generations understood the cost of tyranny. Admiral Zexthal signed the accords with a trembling hand, officially ending thousands of years of imperial rule. As he did so, he looked across the table at Patricia Wells and said something that surprised everyone present. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you for showing us that there was a better way." The signing ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy, reaching species that had never seen their leaders treated as equals. On thousands of worlds, beings who had lived in fear began to hope for a future where their children could live free. The age of the Empire was over. The age of the Confederation had begun. And at the center of it all were the humans, the species that had refused to surrender and had instead taught the galaxy the meaning of courage. 1 year after the signing of the Soul Accords, President Elizabeth Stone stood on the observation deck of New Unity Station, watching ships from dozens of different species dock at the massive spaceport. The station served as the headquarters of the Galactic Confederation, and it buzzed with activity as representatives from across the galaxy worked together to build their new civilization. The transformation had not been easy. Centuries of fear and hatred could not be erased overnight. Many species struggled to trust their former oppressors, while others had difficulty adjusting to freedom after generations of imperial rule. But slowly, steadily, the galaxy was learning to live in peace. General Rick Barnes, now serving as the first human galactic defense commander, reviewed the morning reports from peacekeeping forces across Confederation space. The numbers told a story of gradual progress. Conflicts were being resolved through negotiation rather than violence. Trade between former enemy species was increasing. Most importantly, no worlds had been destroyed, no populations eliminated. The Vorthak had been the biggest challenge. Many species refused to trust the former assassins, regardless of their transformation. But under the leadership of Kethmor, who had taken the human name Marcus Stone as a symbol of his rebirth, the reformed Vorthak had proven themselves worthy of the trust placed in them. "Contact from the vegan system," reported Lieutenant Carroll Green, now serving as communications director for the Defense Force. "The Andromedian delegation is requesting Vorthak peacekeepers to help resolve a border dispute with the Centauri colonies." Rick smiled. 6 months ago, the Andromedians had been calling for the complete exile of all former Vorthak operatives. Now they were specifically requesting their help. The galaxy was learning that redemption was possible, even for those who had committed terrible crimes. Dr. Lisa Carter had been appointed as the Confederation's first director of interspecies relations. Her job was to help different species understand each other, to bridge the gaps created by centuries of imperial policy that had kept subject peoples isolated and suspicious. She spent her days mediating disputes that ranged from trade disagreements to cultural misunderstandings. Today's challenge involved the crystal beings of Alpha Centauri, who communicated through harmonic frequencies, and the silicon-based life forms of Rigel, who used electrical impulses. Both species were trying to establish diplomatic relations, but their completely different forms of communication made understanding difficult. The key is not to force one species to adapt to another, Lisa explained to her team of human and alien translators. The key is to find a common language that works for everyone. The solution came from an unexpected source, a young Vorthak named Zara, who had been trained in infiltration techniques that required understanding multiple forms of communication, suggested using a combination of light patterns and mathematical sequences that both species could interpret. We used to study other species to learn how to eliminate them, Zara explained. Now we can use that knowledge to help them understand each other. The success of the mediation was celebrated throughout the Confederation. It proved that former enemies could work together to solve problems that had seemed impossible. More importantly, it showed that the skills developed during the Imperial era could be repurposed for peaceful ends. Ambassador Patricia Wells had been elected as the first president of the Galactic Confederation Council. The position rotated every 3 years among different species, but the humans had been chosen first in recognition of their role in creating the new order. Patricia took the responsibility seriously, knowing that the decisions made in these early years would shape the galaxy for generations to come. The biggest challenge facing the Confederation was economic. The imperial system had been based on exploitation, with subject species providing resources and labor to support the ruling class. Now that system was gone, replaced by voluntary trade agreements and mutual aid compacts. Some worlds struggled to adapt to the new economic reality. Planets that had been strip-mined for rare minerals needed help developing sustainable industries. Species that had been forced to serve as laborers required education and training to develop new skills. The task was enormous, but the Confederation was committed to ensuring that no world was left behind. The solution came through the Marshall Plan for the Galaxy, named after a similar program from Earth's history. Prosperous worlds would provide aid and assistance to those still recovering from imperial exploitation. Technical knowledge would be shared freely. Most importantly, no species would be forced to participate, but all would be welcome to join. Dr. Alex Kennedy had established the Galactic University, with campuses on dozens of worlds and instructors from hundreds of species. The university's mission was to preserve and share the knowledge that had been lost during the imperial era, while also developing new technologies and ideas for the future. Students from across the galaxy studied together, learning not just science and technology, but also art, philosophy, and the rich cultural traditions of different species. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was experiencing a renaissance of learning and creativity. The university's most popular course was taught by Marcus Stone, the former Kethmore the Silencer. His class, titled From Destruction to Construction, Learning from Our Mistakes, was attended by students from dozens of species, including many former imperial officials who were trying to understand how their civilization had gone so wrong. The Empire taught us that strength came from the ability to destroy, Marcus explained to his latest class. But humanity showed us that true strength comes from the ability to create, to protect, and to help others become their best selves. His transformation had become a symbol of hope throughout the galaxy. If the most feared assassin in Imperial history could change, then anyone could change. Redemption was possible for everyone. The first Galactic Peace Festival was held on New Unity Station, celebrating the first anniversary of the Soul Accords. Representatives from every species in the Confederation attended, sharing food, music, art, and stories from their homeworlds. The festival was broadcast to billions of beings across the galaxy, showing them that their different cultures could coexist and even enhance each other. The highlight of the festival was a joint performance by musicians from 12 different species, each contributing their unique sounds to create something that none could have produced alone. The resulting symphony was so beautiful that it moved many listeners to tears, regardless of their species. As the festival continued, children from different worlds played together in the station's parks and recreation areas. These young beings had never known the fear and hatred of the Imperial era. To them, diversity was normal, cooperation was natural, and peace was the way things had always been. President Stone watched the children play and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what they had fought for. Not just the defeat of the Empire, but the creation of something better. A galaxy where differences were celebrated rather than feared, where problems were solved through cooperation rather than conquest. The statistics spoke for themselves. Trade between Confederation worlds had increased by 400%. Scientific research had accelerated beyond anything achieved during the Imperial era. Art, literature, and music were flourishing as different species shared their creative traditions. Most importantly, not a single species had been eliminated, enslaved, or forcibly relocated since the formation of the Confederation. The galaxy's population was growing, not shrinking. Hope was replacing fear. Admiral Zexthel, now serving as the Confederation's Director of Reconciliation, published his memoirs 1 year after the signing of the Soul Accords. The book, titled The Empire's Last Admiral, became an instant bestseller across the galaxy. In it, he wrote about the lessons he had learned from humanity. "We spent thousands of years believing that order came from fear," he wrote. "We thought that strength meant the ability to destroy our enemies. But the humans taught us that true order comes from justice, and real strength comes from the courage to do what is right, even when it is difficult." The book's final chapter was dedicated to the future. "The Empire is gone," Zexthel wrote, "but its legacy remains in the form of the Confederation. We have learned that different species can work together, that former enemies can become allies, and that peace is not just the absence of war, but the presence of justice and hope." As the second year of the Confederation began, new challenges emerged. Pirates operating from outside Confederation space began raiding trade ships. Environmental disasters on several worlds required massive relief efforts. Political tensions arose between species with different governmental systems, but each challenge was met with cooperation rather than conquest, with aid rather than exploitation. The galaxy had learned the most important lesson of all. They were stronger together than they had ever been apart. The humans continued to serve as peacekeepers and mediators, but they were no longer alone in that role. Former Imperial species had taken up the cause of peace, working alongside their former subjects to build a better future. The Galactic Confederation was far from perfect. There were still conflicts, still problems, still species that struggled to adapt to the new order. But for the first time in millennia,